Hi, and welcome back to Just Ask the Question. I'm your host, Brian Kierman. With me today is John Shank, Pedro Koss, and Bonnie Cohen, the editors and directors and producers. I'm going to get it all in there of The White House Effect, a documentary that's, well, let's see, open to rave reviews at Telluride Film Festival and heads to Netflix at the end of this month. And according to the promo stuff, and look, this you got to see this movie. I'll say that through the lens of entirely archival footage. The fact that you did it entirely through archival footage to me is impressive. You're giving a fly on the wall perspective of the pivotal years surrounding climate change for the George Herbert Walker Bush administration, which I covered and remember all too well. It was a time when global warming was first introduced to the world, and by the way, in the beginning, as correctly stated here, this was through the lens of science. It wasn't politically motivated. That changed dramatically, and it became politicized when it became apparent that there were certain people with a lot of money, let's say oil producers, who didn't want the world to know what was going on. At least that was my take from the White House when I was covering it, and my take from the field. So, with that said, thanks guys for joining me for this. I consider this a pretty important discussion because, as you well know, today we still have people who politicize this while it's a well-known fact that it is a problem. In fact, I was there in the White House during the first Trump administration when they decided to back out of the Paris Accords. And I thought that was just horrifying. But there
Yeah.
are parallels to that you all point out, the parallels between then and now. So I guess I want to start with what drove you to want to produce this film? And I could go left or right, but is there anybody who feels compelled to start
And
off?
you need to address us because otherwise we'll just start,
Okay,
speaking
well,
over each
all right,
other.
I'll start with you, Bonnie.
Oh, great. Okay. Fantastic. Well, John, Pedro, and I have, made a lot of work in the climate space before. In fact, we all worked together on a film a number of years ago called The Island President, which was about President Mohammed Nasheed of the Maldives and his quest to save his island nation. Um, and we followed him to the Copenhagen climate conference in that movie. We've really wrestled in this space a long time, trying to find the right stories for the right time to really move people emotionally so that they can. It's a very hard kind of issue to feel
I think you did
deeply.
that very well, moving people emotionally with the film.
Thank you, thank
Yes.
you. And we wrestled around with what could we do next, and history is always a place to turn, and archival material where you're not where the film is not using expert material and where we're not editorializing in a way with new voices and voices of contemporary time. We thought, wouldn't it be fascinating to go back into this sort of single moment in history where we see in the Bush senior White House an openness to understand that climate change is serious and a government that was open to do something about it. And in the course of the film, you start to see that change for the first time.
Yeah.
Um, and so we were really compelled by that, finding a historical moment where we could use archival materials only, which are kind of irrefutable and the voice of history. And that felt like a very strong foot forward for moving people emotionally and also a story that not a lot of people know.
Well, yeah, and for those of us who covered it and were there, I thought it really kind of hit the high points of the problems that occurred and when things started to change and put it into context that we were not able to do on a daily basis, covering it as it occurred. John, I would ask you about your cat, but was, but I'll ask you: was there any concern about as you put this material together that people would accuse you of taking an editorial stance by the stuff that you chose to highlight in the film?
Well, this is our third kind of what we consider major documentary about climate change related stuff. So we've been at this for a while, and we know that there's a giant machine out there funded by corporate interests, as you said earlier. That I don't know, it's rote to say it at this point, but I guess it's worth saying that anything that speaks the truth on the subject is going to be undermined by the fossil fuel industry. And you kind of know that going in. And it's actually just academically, it's interesting to watch. I don't know if you've had this experience with your reporting, but you put something out there that speaks the truth on climate, and just automatically, whatever review site, Rotten Tomatoes or any of those IMDb or any of those kind of film related sites or any climate news site it seems like it just has bots that are funded to attack it and undermine it and make it seem
No,
like
it doesn't seem so. It is so.
it
You are
is so.
there's no seeming about that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, so we kind of we have our eyes open going in. On the other hand, I think that the three of us really saw an opportunity here to retell the climate change story. When you're interested in this topic, and obviously we are, and it kind of moves you to the core. It feels like the most important thing. It is the most important thing. What could be more important than saving the planet? And so we feel like we have to figure out different ways to tell the truth about this. And one hole, so to speak, in the climate change documentary genre seemed to be to us the history. Where did this come from? How did we get here? How did we get to a place where we're living in a country where we can't agree on what the truth of science is? It's so absurd. And we realized that there was actually this human drama that took place that sounds like you witnessed back in the day, between Bush's chief of staff John Sununu and his head of the EPA Bill Riley. It really was like a kind of best of enemies, drama, where Bush had an angel on one shoulder telling him the truth and a devil on the other shoulder telling him how he could survive politically. And they were going at it to kind of win the soul of a man that turns out probably could have gone either way, even though he was an oil executive earlier in his life. Bush, according to the documents that we uncovered at the Bush Library, really did think this was an important issue worth attacking. And Sununu really did work with the industry to undermine that. So we thought, wow, that, like Bonnie was saying, that's an emotional human drama that we could tell that isn't out there in the world yet.
Yeah, I don't think many people understand the strife that was gone through, and they paint it black and white. Bad guy, good guy, but there is a nuance to it. But in the end, we're all suffering because of that particular fight. And Pedro, I guess my question to you would be, what was the biggest surprise? Was that it? Was that there was a struggle? But what surprised you the most as you began to put this film together?
Oh, it's going to be hard to narrow down the list because I think one of the thing that
Well, hit me, baby. We're here. What you got?
Well, we in the beginning we were really inspired by all of us, Bonnie, John, myself, the producers, Josh Penn and Noah Stahl and Justine. We were really moved by what started as a New York Times Magazine article by Nathaniel Rich that became the book Losing Earth, which is an extraordinary novel. And we began to, which tells the story, the kind of the behind the scenes and to what led to the politicization of the science. And we cast out an enormous net of trying to see how we could tell the story in a way that was immersive, was transported viewers in a way to a time when the science was not political, right? It was not a political football. And to see, as Bonnie says, that moment where we could have done something, where we could have, there was that window of chance before the record broke and started, playing the same narrative over and over again. So I'll tell you a few things, a few of the highlights. That, we went far and wide. We uncovered extraordinary materials at the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library. We have an extraordinary team of researchers that went and spent time there and uncovered all of that correspondence between John Sununu and the oil companies, kind of to see who had Open Door Sununu's ear, and therefore to President Bush's ear. And also the internal communications. And so, like, I think I was personally really surprised at how open, as John said, President Bush was actually to taking action first and foremost, and how he much respected Bill Riley, and also how how Machiavellian Sununu was. I mean, we've through all that correspondence. The other thing that I'll bring out, and I would love to hear
Machiavellian is a cliche today, but go ahead.
And sort of so quaint comparatively.
What a quaint concept.
Yes.
But go ahead.
The Prince, such a feel-good book. But and I'd love to hear what John and Bonnie, what surprised them. For me, it was one of the treasures that we really uncovered were the man on the street. You know, the all the archives dating back from the 70s, you know, to the oil crisis of the 70s, where we could actually measure the pulse in a way of us, the American public, right? And how, and sort of not only tracking the political story and the industrial story and the scientific story, but like the story of the public perception of this issue, and how in 1988 you have a public that was kind of united. It was, as the radio announcer in Iowa says, the radio host in Iowa says it's a mom and pop apple pie issue. Like, no one would be opposed to protecting the environment, right? That was something that was universally accepted. Everyone was concerned. Everyone wanted to tackle this issue head on. Both candidates from both major parties campaigned as environmentalists. Then they were trying to outdo one another as environmentalists. And flash forward to 4 years later, what happened? It was a completely divided electorate.
Yeah,
And
well,
that we saw in all those man on the street interviews. That was something that, like, was really shocking to us. Like, you have, like, almost like basically unanimous, 1988, you have unanimous support for the environment. It's some apple pie mom and pop issue. 4 years later, it's completely divided. The faults kind of, or the chasm.
because of disinformation.
Bingo.
Well, that's
There was the schism. There was like enough room in there. It's interesting the way information seeps out and then therefore gives way to disinformation. If there's an invitation or an availability, an opening for that disinformation to engage the public, you can, if you're a propagandist, you can seize on that, you know.
You know that.
But it is interesting, like looking back at early Rush Limbaugh, right, in comparison to today, when that first started happening, as Pedro says, you start to see this evolution of man on the street just kind of in the 70s. Yeah, it's true. We need to do something about this. The president's right. He can't do it himself. I admit I don't like to be cold in the winter, but, you know, we really,
right.
this is, our kids are telling us we need to do something about this. To an evolution of the American public hearing the Rush Limbaughs and the other propagandists on the radio, then saying things about, you know, hearing the tropes and repeating them back. This is a communist scheme, this idea that we have to do something about
It isn't.
the
Oh my
climate.
God!
Right, but you know, to see that happen to our population, given where we are now, is really, it's intense for
Well,
what we've seen, especially for younger people who see
Yeah.
the film.
Exactly.
John,
And
you
in a
had
way, we live in that hypercharged. Currently, we live
Yeah.
in very much that hypercharged space. But Rush Limbaugh said something very illuminating in the archive, where he says, like, it's a business. Like, it is, like, it's about getting the most audience for as much as possible.
Yeah, I'm running a business.
Yeah, don't get me. That's a different issue, and I could spend an hour talking about how we've destroyed my business by treating it as only profit. But
That's
John,
right.
you had a point you wanted to make. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
I was just going to add that, you know, in many ways, you know, It's a Machiavellian story. It's a Shakespearean tragedy. I think
Yeah,
you can look at it
our
that.
life these days. But go
Yeah,
ahead.
you could look at it that way. Um, Somehow it feels elevated, charged, more intense, whatever you want to call it, because of the stakes. We're not talking about the
Do you think we're
legacy of
aware of the stakes? Because, and here's why I ask that. And what you said, Bonnie, and what you said, Pedro, and John, to what you said, um, I find critical thinking is long dead, and I think there's a segment of the population, because of public education as it has divided and dissipated. No Child Left Behind became Every Child Left Behind, because we started teaching to a test. We don't teach civics. But the idea of critical thinking, I mean, to the point that you all were making, I remember when this first started out, it was called global warming, right? And then they had to change the name to climate change because global warming got a bad rap. And people didn't understand that while temperatures rise globally, there's a variance at different areas, that you could get more rain, you could get a colder winter, but it was going to be hotter overall on the planet. Not really understanding the science behind it. But in the beginning, as you all pointed out, it was people said, "Yeah, we care about the climate." Then we were told that it was that this didn't exist through the propagandists, that this is simply didn't exist. And now it's not only didn't exist, but it's a threat to us. And the far left wants to, make money off of green culture, and it's all a hoax. So it's kind of progress. The progress has been a de-evolution from thinking of the facts to thinking of, a fiction. I mean, to me,
Well, I don't want to, just to make a slight correction. Critical thinking is not what's dead. Critical
what do
thinking
you
is
think
still
is
very
dead?
much, well, it's very much alive. It's just not being celebrated in the way that it should be. It's being
I think fewer people have the capacity.
that well, and fewer people really are given access to it in the way that we would need in order to solve this problem. There are plenty of people. I mean, I just want to speak for one moment to the drumbeat of the scientists in this film.
Well,
You
that
know,
critical thinking from scientists. I'm talking about the people in the street that you were
no,
talking to.
I know. I don't think I think the people on the street, when they're given access, Steven Schneider says in the film, the scientist from NOAA, and also from
Yeah,
I'm not NOAA, from NCAR and from Stanford, that if you put certain kinds of information into the atmosphere over the airwaves, and it's conflicting with each other, the American people, by virtue, are going to be confused, and they're not going to know how to be or how to act. So the purpose of the disinformation is just confusion. But the critical thinking is in there. If we can just, it's sort of our job to keep pulling the population back and redirecting them. Like, think about how
do
you
you
need to
think that's what
redirect.
this film would be? Is its greatest success would be
The
in
greatest
getting?
success, I think, of this film would be for people to understand that they have agency. They have agency in what they read and what they listen to, and then therefore how they think, and ultimately how they vote. Voting is the ultimate, right?
That's an interesting, because you bring up John Sununu, same side of the coin as Donald Trump, who says that climate change is a threat to U.S. sovereignty. John, I'll go back to you for that, and then Pedro, and then Bonnie. But do you find that our politicians today have just followed the trope, or do you think that there's impetus to do so because of money?
Hmm.
John?
Well, look, the science has one thing going for it, in that it generally points to the truth, and that's also true of history, right? If you
One would hope.
the old adage that if you don't study history, you're destined to repeat the mistakes of history, and this film is very much made with that kind of ethos in mind. I think that, of course, we have polluted politics has polluted critical thinking. It's tried to undermine the truth. The truth has one thing going for it, is that it always wins in the end. The planet will warm, because we know from science that it will warm, and that will screw the American people. And by watching this film, you can see how the underpinnings of how the oil industry did that to us. It can confuse American people, and you could start to get a foothold back in control of your own destiny. And that's very important. We live in a kind of a messed up world right now. Politics
Dude.
are really extreme, and
No.
like Pedro was talking about, social media has accelerated this and given kind of the bad guys tools that are just you know just kind of insanely powerful. On the other hand, we still do live in a society where people are relatively free to say stuff, and we have companies, CEOs, law firms choosing not to say the truth. And we need to get back to that. We need to study history and learn that these mistakes where we kind of go along because it's easier to do in the moment actually have
Right.
ginormous consequences, as we not really a word, but they have enormous consequences as we move forward in time. And so
Yeah.
we're living today in 2025. If you look at 1980 or even earlier, the science that Exxon was doing and that the great scientists at NASA, Goddard, and other institutions were doing at the time, they pointed to exactly where we are today, which is now 1.5, 1.6 degrees centigrade above average temperatures. It's a very dangerous place to be. Florida, if we sustain the temperatures we're at now, Florida, the coast will cease to exist, not to mention coastlines around the world and economic disruptions and all the rest. We need to learn from this history in order to not to repeat it. That just has the convenience, as Al Gore would say, of being true. Like they can lie to you, they can try to confuse you all you want, but in the end, by using more fossil fuels and continuing to have the economy based on that kind of dirty, polluting power, is going to really affect our lives in a negative way.
Pedro.
And that was, that was something that I think another item that was really kind of revelatory to us was the fact that the scientists in the 80s, including the scientists from Exxon and other oil companies, were literally predicting accurately what we're living through now. So
Yeah.
what their predictions were back then, we're living through now. And we can say, no matter what we want, it's not going to take away from the fact that we are living the climate crisis now. With the effects are real, and I believe it was it's been admitted that we're not going to be able to contain the warming to just 1.5 degrees as the Paris Accords were hoping to. So we can continue to ignore, but the price we're going to pay is just going to keep increasing. And that's the price to pay not only for the society in general, but for these enormous corporations that are actually literally feeding the denialist movement.
Well,
Not only feeding the denialist movement, but now I think it's fair to kind of look at much of the U.S. government as employees of the fossil fuel business. I mean,
well,
that we have a very corrupted system that thankfully has some vestiges of kind of the American dream still built into it, that hopefully we can grab a hold of and get back to some sense of normalcy. But they have really succeeded in basically taking over at least one political party as its own employees.
yeah, and Bonnie, but so people who doubt, who people who still have questions and are capable of critical thinking, the question I hear most often is, to what ends would they lie like this? Because they're going to suffer like the rest of us, so they must be right, and the scientists must be wrong. And so, Bonnie, how do you approach somebody like now? Your film does an excellent job of that, and I've taken you all far afield of what the film actually does because it's really important to, I think, to put your film in context. And I'll plug it for you. I think it's an excellent film that everyone should see, and I would recommend that everyone watch as you see what the government did and how it did it in almost real time. And I'll tell you, before we started, I was in the Gulf War, and I remember walking through. They had torched all the oil fields. And I had just done a story before I'd gone to the Gulf War about the problems of global warming. And I remember walking through the desert. It's noon, and the only time I wore my gas mask was on a noon in the middle of the desert in the middle of summer, because it was like midnight from the soot and the oil from just the Gulf, from the oil wells that they had set on fire. And I knew, you look at it and you extrapolate that into what's been going on across the planet, it seems to me there's no doubt of the problems that we're going through. But Bonnie, again, the question would be, to what end? Why would they? Is it just money? I mean, don't they see that they could die too? What do you think is going through what's going through their minds?
You're asking me to put myself in the mind of a
Yes, I am.
conservative capitalist Republican who doesn't believe in climate change.
Well,
Well,
I think they do, but I think they just don't want to admit it.
I mean, it's not that it's just economic. I mean, it is just economic. That is, Sununu talks about working on behalf of the environment to the extent that Americans would have to start making sacrifices as being un-American and uncapitalist and uneconomic. I mean, those are the motivators, to keep the American
Money.
public in a place where they want to continue to have the things that make their lives easy. They drive to work, they take their kids to school in the car, they, use electricity, all the things that we have become accustomed. The that is not something that's on the table to be given up. That is something that we deserve as Americans, and we use as Americans, and we want to continue to benefit from. And I believe that those that don't want to do anything about the climate crisis seize on those basic human needs and interests in order to keep the public in a place where they can control them.
My question is, I guess, going forward, based on what this movie shows, going forward, and factoring into this discussion, the current actions of our current government. Do the three of you, and I'll start with you, Pedro, because I started with, let's see, I gave John first whack, Bonnie first whack, your turn. First whack, I'll start with you, Pedro.
Not sure it's a position we want to be in necessarily.
Yeah,
First position.
Exactly.
but do you see that there is any, based on what you all have said, based on what the movie shows, is there any cause? And I hate to use the word hope, but is there any cause for hope that we will stop this before it becomes? And I don't think the planet's in peril. I think humanity is. The planet will it'll recover and be just fine. It just will be sans humans at some point in time. So do you have any thoughts on that, Pedro?
I do. I do have hope. I think what Bonnie said at the end, what's so hopeful is the realization of agencies, that we have agency, right? And also what's also hopeful is the fact that there, if you talk to scientists, if you talk to um, a good portion of the population, is fighting for this. There's growing numbers of people and movements that are on the front lines. The front lines are just getting larger. So I don't think I don't think it's productive to just despair in a moment of enormous challenges, because I think we have today, we have the tools, or a lot of the tools that we need to solve this. It's literally mostly just a political issue, and so the challenge is I feel that, like,
In other words, you think the science is there that we can mitigate the problems without extinction of the human species if we just wake up?
I think the awakening, the process of awakening, it's a drawn out process. But as the truth becomes self-evident, at some point in time, we are going to see that the that the emperor has no clothes, right? That the truth, like all of a sudden,
There's a thought. there's,
um,
there's a mental image I'll never get out of my head, but go ahead.
um, in so many ways. But no, I'm not just speaking about the current resident of the White House. I'm talking about just the truth in general. When we realize that like this is actually happening, I'm from a place. I'm originally from Brazil. I'm born and raised. We in the past few years we have had more climate disasters put together than like it's and we are realizing that there's something off, there's something wrong, and this is hypercharged. I will challenge you. I mean, of course there are climate deniers down there, but it is kind of widely accepted because we are living through it. The
Well, there's a
truth
We have
is,
just going back to the film for a second, Brian.
yes.
We had the benefit of, as filmmakers and storytellers, of spending the last several years of our life basically making kind of a time lapse of history. We kind of speed the viewer through this, particular 4-year period in the 80s, but really, 150 years, you could say, of history, of American history since the first successful commercial oil well in the late 1880s. And you're able to sit there in a 90-minute period of time in a movie theater or on Netflix and watch this spin by really quickly. And that kind of perspective is kind of awesome, to be able to watch human history from a very particular lens, which this kind of scientific political take on the climate crisis, spin by and watch all the emotional kind of storytelling and the characters that rise and fall out of that, really does allow a special kind of perspective that we think that no other medium can. You can learn science from textbooks, you can read journals, but really to understand the human emotional drama, the White House effect is really, I think, the closest thing we have to kind of telling that history in a sped up fashion. That's a very privileged place to be as human beings, to be able to watch that. It's a very special thing that I'm very proud that we have created, and we really had the privilege, thanks to our funders and supporters, to make this film. I really hope people watch it because this has been going on long enough, unfortunately, for us to have a very significant impact on our own species, as you say. And it's time that we take 90 minutes out of our lives to kind of see what the effect has been and hopefully make changes going forward.
We're about to have a very specific metric on how many people are actually interested in watching this and seeing it and experiencing it and going on to make a difference. We will know. We see you. We will know how many people have watched the film. Hopefully, Netflix will let us know, and that'll be a really interesting litmus test to tell how not only the American people but the world feels about trying to understand history and do better.
So as we close, I go back to the title. I was going to ask this first, but I think this is a better place for it. The White House Effect. What do each of you think the White House effect actually is?
Well, I'm glad you're asking all of us because this is like a Rashomon type experiment. The reason we love the title is it can mean so many different things.
Yes.
I have many feelings about it, and I'll just give you one, which, and of course George Bush says it in the film. Those of you who think we can't do anything about the global warming effect haven't seen the White House effect yet, meaning when I get in to be president, I'm going to do something about this. To me, it's about voting. It's about, again, I'm going back to the agency. The White House effect is actually in our hands. We as voters in a democratic society have the ability to put in, as long as elections aren't rigged, are able to put into office the people who are going to help make change for us, show leadership to help us make the change that we need. And the White House effect, you can take that with a positive connotation or a negative connotation, but it is to me, it is a reflection of the democracy that we have built in this country over time that we can either take back and make our own and create the change we need, or blindly go forward into whatever, over this cliff, whatever cliff it is that we're going over currently. So we're using history to teach that lesson. But I think that when you watch The White House Effect, especially young people, John and I are married. We have two kids in their 20s. When they saw this film, they were furious. They had rage. They said, what do we do with this rage? And we said, that is exactly what our intention was, to create rage in young people so that they will see that they have this agency and can do something about it.
John?
When we found in the film, just to be clear about what we're talking about, one of the amazing pieces of footage we found is George Bush in the summer of 1988 is on the campaign trail trying to differentiate himself from Reagan, who had a pretty terrible record on environmental stewardship. And
well, that's being generous, but go ahead.
and Bush says in Michigan in the summer of '88, for those of you who are worried about this so-called greenhouse effect, you have forgotten about the White House effect. When I get into office as a Republican, I am going to solve the greenhouse effect. It's not a conservative issue or a liberal issue. It's an issue for all of humanity. And he was speaking the truth, our brother HW at that time. And I think I want to believe that he believed that at that moment, that he could run on something that was an apple pie issue, as Pedro was saying, and kind of have a win-win. He created that, or a speechwriter did. It's such a brilliant turn of phrase. It means exactly what Bonnie was saying, is, the White House, the people's house, the people in power there have so much control over the destiny of not just this country, but so much of the world, as people who live on Earth today. Who could have known just how much damage the White House effect could have done by those decisions made then? I certainly didn't. I was a sophomore in college at that point, and I might have seen that headline, maybe not. I think some Americans were paying attention, some weren't.
You just made me feel very old, but go ahead.
But the point is that these moments of critical decisions have enormous consequences, and we have to learn from history. And I think that by watching this film and watching this human drama unfold, you will laugh, you will cry. It has all that movie stuff in it. It's brilliantly edited, headed up by Pedro, and we're hopeful that the White House effect can be turned back into a good thing, something that can actually be a powerful force for good in our lives.
Pedro, your thoughts on what the White House effect means?
Going last isn't fun.
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think I can. I mean, I echo what Bonnie and John have just said. I think for me, the film is really about choices and about agency. But I'll say this as someone from, I am an American citizen, but I'm also from Brazil. And I also see this from the other side of the border as well. And the White House effect is very much about, for me, the choices that we as Americans make, but that the world, that the entire planet will experience, and how it impacts. And the choices that we make here have repercussions far beyond our borders. And it's about our collective house, this planet. And it's at the end of the day, it's really up to us to care for that house. So, and that we have that choice.
Well, I'll finish with, I loathe to ask this question, but I must, as a White House reporter, and I'll ask it of each of you. Do you think there's anyone in the current White House environment who would listen to, or even watch this movie, or listen to what the scientists have to say? Have you found anyone in the current administration? And I guess I would ask you, what would you say to the president if you had a shot at it? Bonnie, I'm going to give you the first shot on that one.
I I actually don't know how to answer that question because I'm not
Then
well
damn it,
versed
I
in.
did a good job.
I have, yeah, I mean, by nature, by virtue of the way that you've asked the question and how we all feel, we kind of know the answer, that it feels relatively impossible to have conversation with the current White House about this. I would hope that they would at least be interested in history and what previous Republican presidents have done with this issue. I think it would be interesting to, and we're planning to have some screenings on Capitol Hill. So stay tuned. I don't feel completely prepared to answer that question.
I will stay tuned. I will probably be there on Capitol Hill when you do it. Pedro, your
Great.
thoughts?
Um, I don't. I'll ask a question back to you. What's the purpose of trying to have a dialogue with someone who clearly does not want to have it?
Right.
Well, I asked the question. Damn it! What's your answer?
But I mean,
But I will answer that because I don't think that unless you bring the question up, which is why I'll just quote what Helen Thomas taught me, and the reason why I call this podcast "Just Ask the Question." She told me, Brian, it doesn't matter what the answer is. It doesn't matter if they answer at all. Ask the question, and therefore
Yes.
they cannot deny that it's been put on the record, and they must consider it. So
Yes.
that's why I ask questions.
That's
So
terrific.
yeah, she was
Yeah,
a great lady.
yeah. I mean,
We're being
that
told we have to wrap.
Yeah.
that's the thing. That's the thing,
She's,
Brian. That's so
well, thank you,
important.
Emily. I'm the director here. Relax. We're almost done. Go ahead.
That's the thing that this film was really made in that spirit. Um, you know, the climate change will be solved by people from all walks of life. Scientists play a role. Industry plays a role. Obviously, politicians play a role. Artists and journalists also play a key role. It's our job and responsibility to figure out ways to try to capture the imagination of as many people as possible. There are people at the margins. Our elections these days, the last several cycles, have been won right at the margin. These are
Right.
not as much as the Republicans want to say it. These are not landslide elections. These are marginal elections. They can be won. We can win back Congress. We can win the presidency. We had in Biden, the Biden administration in the last Congress, actually a very pro climate. We passed bills that people thought would never get passed, like things like the Inflation Reduction Act. These things can happen, and they've happened actually in very, very recent history. It's not crazy to think that we could get back there. Is there anybody
We
in the
need to
Trump?
get back
Is there
there.
somebody in the Trump administration that really is serious about climate change? Obviously not. There probably are people in the EPA that still have their jobs who aren't looking up from their desk. They're hoping to survive that still know what the truth is. Of course there are. But we need to get the reins of power back and get back
Yeah.
on the right track. Whether that happens, at the midterms or the next presidential election or whatever it is, we really need to do that to get back on the right track. And the film kind of speaks to those people who are, still critical thinkers, still understand that elections matter. There are those people in America. Civil society is still functioning, and we have the hope that this film can be a part of that and an important piece of that.
Well, with that, I want to thank you guys for being here. The name of
Thank you, Brian.
it was just having a discussion with you guys made my day better because
Oh, good.
Yeah.
actually talking to cogent people who can put a sentence together without
The bar
without,
is very low. The bar is very
Yeah,
low.
I'm glad we met the bar.
yeah, you did great. And not once did you call me fake media. I'm in heaven. I'm in heaven. So the name of the movie is The White House Effect. It'll be on Netflix October 31st. I recommend that everyone take a look at it because it's very intelligently done. It's very well done. As a documentary filmmaker myself, I love how you all put it together and what you did with it. And I
Thank
found
you.
it, yeah, you laughed, you cried it at everything. So thanks for being here. I'll do what I can to help you guys out. Is there anything else you want to plug before we take off?
Thank you so much, Brian. We really appreciate your time and best of luck to you.
Well, they haven't thrown me out of the country yet.
Keep asking questions.
Keep up the good work.
Exactly.
Thanks. All right. The name of the show is Just Ask the Question. I am your host, Brian Kiram. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks.
Thank you.